Hey everybody, Cody Shirk here in South Florida. It is rainy and windy out, and I'm going to go inside and tell you a cool story. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. The country of Zambia, which is in Africa, has been making the news lately, specifically in US press releases. And this is a country that most people in the US don't know much about. And it's a country that's going to be increasingly important to the US, China, and really the entire global economy. And there's currently a power struggle going on there right now. And you'll probably hear about it a lot more in the coming years, but you should know about it right now because you should position yourself as an investor or someone who cares about the direction the world is headed and the position that you'll be in personally. So let's dive in.
Zambia is in the news because of their copper. Now, Zambia as a country is one of the largest copper producers in the world. They're in the top 10, as it stands for countries that actually pull copper out of the ground and sell it to the international market. But the thing that's interesting about Zambia is they have very high quality copper, and the government knows that, and they have been making announcements over the past couple of months that indicate they want to play ball, they want to do business with multiple different countries around the world. And I'm going to explain what's going on here and also share some details about what different governments are doing. And if you're an investor, you want to understand who's doing what, because there are some huge opportunities here, but also some huge risks. So you can see in this announcement, Zambia is going to increase their copper output, and the government themselves is saying that they're actually receiving numerous unsolicited offers from multiple different governments. So it's not really a challenge for them to attract investors or business. It's more about how is this all going to, go down? Who's going to get the rights to what? So the U.S., of course, is legendary for going around the world and making deals with numerous different countries to secure resources, to push agendas, and to push influence on governments. And the U.S. has been pushing a project called the Lito Corridor, which is a railway system that goes from Zambia through Congo to Angola. And there's a port in Angola called Lito. This port is going to export resources like copper and other metals to the US and Europe. I made a video about this earlier that you can check out to explain that whole story, but Zambia is a key part of this. And so the US is developing relationships with Zambia to strengthen this corridor and strengthen the influence that the US has over Zambia. There have been numerous press releases over the past year, and especially over the past couple months. The US even hosted an event in Lusaka, which is the capital of Zambia, to have private businesses from the US and other parts of the world come to the country and try and set up shop. Of course, that's that soft power of the US coming into a country, having foreign investors come in and trying to improve the economy, but of course, proving that they're going to better the lives and the government of Zambia through this economic soft power. One thing that's really interesting is that they're also doing initiatives with the Zambian government to fight other issues that don't have anything to do with resources. For example, this one is to prevent human trafficking. This one is another grant that is showing the agriculture sector support that the U.S. is giving to Zambia. It's almost $500 million, $500 million that the U.S. is giving. Right here it says a debt-free grant from the U.S. to the Zambian government. Specifically, it's the last part of the sentence, to complement the U.S. government's investments in the Lito Corridor. Translation, the U.S. wants to develop Zambia in a way that Zambia feels good about, so the U.S. can get as many minerals and resources out of the country as possible to develop electrical vehicles, electrical systems, and other electricity-heavy industries in the U.S. and throughout the world. Here's the announcement showing the actual grant, the debt-free grant from the embassy, U.S. Embassy in Zambia. The U.S. is also training with the army of Zambia, and this is where it starts to get interesting. This is where you can see, okay, the U.S. is doing more than just this soft power. They're actually getting their military involved. They're actually forming a bond with the Zambian government, and this, if you can read between the lines, is going to hopefully in the future prevent foreign governments from intervening or having any power. Of course, as I'll get to in a moment, there already are other governments there right now. This is especially interesting. The U.S. has deployed their cyber team to Zambia. The U.S. actually doesn't deploy their cyber team very often in foreign countries, but they did in Zambia. And why were they doing that? Because Zambia uncovers sophisticated Chinese cybercrime syndicate. And that's the other main country that's in Zambia, pulling out tons of copper. China has been a major investor and extractor of resources from Zambia. China has had a booming economy for decades now, and Zambia has been a big part of that supply chain for copper, cobalt, and other metals that play into the manufacturing and other growth that China has seen. The U.S. obviously is not super happy about that, even though the U.S. buys tons of products from China, which is a bit ironic. And the U.S. ended up putting 22 Chinese nationals to sentenced to prison in Zambia with the help of Zambia, of course. So this is a Zambia thing, but the U.S. was helping the Zambian government target everything that was going on here. It's not just the Chinese involved here. The Saudis are trying to invest in Zambia, as well as UAE through Abu Dhabi. There's all kinds of interests globally in Zambia, and that's that larger geopolitical game that's going on within this country and why it's making the news right now. But again, Zambia wants this to happen. They want foreign investment. They've announced that they're going to release a whole bunch of permits to multiple different countries, or should say companies that are represented by different countries. And I'm going to get to something very important here, which is you're going to understand a lot of why the U.S. is in there right now, and that's right here. Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos backed startup discovers large-scale copper deposit in Zambia. And of course, I'm sure you're thinking, oh my gosh, the US government is going in to support the company that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos backed because these are two billionaires that are so powerful and they have a company that's in the best interest of the US government and it's in the best interest of the US to be in Zambia. The answer to all of that is yes, of course, that's what the US does. It just happens to be that Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos are often involved in projects that are borderline intermingled with the government. So this company in particular that they invested in is called Cobalt. And I've talked about this company before. This company is currently private and they are in Zambia. They located a huge copper deposit using AI. They have these really high-tech systems to somewhat predict where there are deposits based upon different surveys they're taking, different instruments they use to look into the ground and combine that all with AI, and you end up with a company that's able to locate all of these huge deposits of minerals and metals around the world. And one of their first big discoveries is in Zambia. So this company is backed by these two billionaires, and of course the U.S. Wants to support this company, but it's also in the U.S.'s best interest to have access to copper and other minerals and metals long term. So again, for the U.S. empire, this is very much in the best interest of everybody in the U.S. But the interesting thing is the Zambian government is actually collaborating with this company, with Cobalt. In fact, it says it blatantly on the Zambian website. This is a Zambian government website, and it explains the whole story here. And for an investor, the important part that you probably want to know about is that this company plans to go public in the next 3 to 4 years. So where's Russia in all this? I already talked a little about China. China has had some debt issues with Zambia, meaning they lent a lot of money to Zambia, and then Zambia wasn't able to pay it back. So they've been battling it out in court to figure out how to restructure that debt. But I thought I'd throw in this little Russian story here because this really has nothing to do with anything I just mentioned, but it does show the bigger geopolitical picture. And there was a Zambian citizen that got arrested in Russia for drug charges. Then that person went to jail in Russia, but then was recruited by the Wagner group and went and fought in Ukraine. And so the Zambian government ended up saying, what the heck is our Zambian citizen doing dead in Ukraine fighting this war? And Russia basically said, oh, he signed up for the Wagner group. And of course, it doesn't really have to do with what I'm talking about, copper and Zambia and the US and China, but it kind of does because the Wagner forces are actually in Africa right now. They've already overthrown 3 separate governments in the Sahel region of Africa. And the Wagner group is in Rwanda, which is up by the Congo area. And this entire region of Africa, which I'm talking about, the Lito Corridor, so that's Zambia, Congo, Angola. This whole area is more or less having a large U.S. influence compared to the Sahel region, which is really dominated by Russia right now. Well, Russia is starting to put some pressure down in this region where there's copper. So I wanted to throw this little story in there just to show that, yes, there's a bigger story here, and yes, there's multiple powers at play within Zambia. All right. So I'd mentioned the debt issue with China, and Zambia agreed to restructure this debt. This is pretty recently, a couple weeks ago, with Chinese lenders. It happens to be that I'll go back to this slide. It happens to be India was actually involved in that debt restructuring as well, but it just goes to show that U.S. isn't the only colonial power or the only foreign power going into Zambia. The Chinese are, India is, the UAE, the Saudis, Russia is sniffing around. So they're all looking at Zambia and all of Africa really because of the resources. And a lot of Africans complain about this, and I can certainly understand why they would be complaining. Africa has had colonists there for hundreds of years, and it's really just continuing with the same trend. This is an interesting part I wanted to show because on one hand, it showed I just explained to you that Zambia is in debt with China, but now China is willing to invest again back into Zambia to develop this railway, which will go from Zambia through Tanzania out to the Indian Ocean, which will give China direct access to the resources within Africa. This railway is actually already built. The Chinese built this railway in the 60s and 70s, but they're going to invest a lot more to revamp it, to modernize it, and have the ability for China to extract more resources out of this part of Africa. Again, the Lito Corridor, which is on the other side, goes from Zambia through Congo and then through Angola. So the U.S. is extracting resources towards the Atlantic. Ultimately, the U.S. actually wants to get a railway that goes all the way across Africa. We'll see how that intersects with the Chinese project because there literally is going to be a point where the railways cross. So we'll have to see how that actually unfolds. I wanted to end this entire topic with Zambia with an article that I found that is not in major mainstream media. It's actually on a website called Tom Dispatch. I don't really know much about this site. I think it probably has a certain spin, but it has a very good point with this specific article. And the title says it all, or the subtitle, Robbing Africa's Riches to Save the Climate, Empower AI. The bigger trend here is the US and other major superpowers are in a grab for resources right now. They're trying to get rare earth metals, copper, lithium, all types of resources to power this electrical revolution that not only involves the consumption of electricity for manufacturing, vehicles, etc., but the consumption of electricity at data centers and AI. And this article basically explains how ironic, or I shouldn't say ironic, but the dichotomy that there is where you have one country trying to modernize to a hyper level like the US, and they're going into another country and pillaging its resources. And the stark contrast is it's most often ignored, but this is a good article that explains how the US has this super high quality of life because of all the resources and metals that are being pulled out of Africa. Meanwhile, Africa is suffering pretty significant environmental damage from a lot of these mines. And the US and many other countries aren't mining in their own countries because they don't want the environmental risk that is going on in Africa. So I had to add that little opinion piece there. Not that I'm trying to sway opinion any which way. I just wanted to show the bigger picture of what's going on and a little bit of the other side of the argument of what is happening in Africa and some sympathy for those on the ground there. That said, if the development of these mines and the extraction of these resources is good for the economies locally in Africa, maybe it's a good thing. And maybe that's why the Zambian government does want to play ball with exterior powers that come in and are able to structure business incentives in a way where the locals are benefiting. All right, I'll end it there. I'll jump into another African topic soon, but I wanted to go over Zambia and copper. All right, see you guys.